Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Mattone, and I'm here on behalf of Yorktown for Justice, an organization of Yorktown residents dedicated to bringing diversity, equality, inclusion, and justice to our community. I'm here with Stephanie Keegan, candidate for New York State Assembly's 94th District, which represents Yorktown and other nearby communities. Stephanie has agreed to participate in a Q&A session focusing on racial equality and justice in our community. We appreciate her willingness to take some time so close to Election Day and talk to us about her views on a variety of issues and how she would serve Yorktown residents. Now, we thank Stephanie for participating. Unfortunately, her opponent, Kevin Byrne, was unable to respond to our requests. So instead of a debate setting, this will be a Q&A between Stephanie and myself. And before we get to those questions, Stephanie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you feel you are the best candidate to represent the 94th Assembly District?
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be able to share some time with you because I think that the issues that we're going to talk about here are really, really important, especially in this climate of such contentious, bitter conversation between people about what priorities should be. So a little background, I am a former educator. I taught English in an alternative school in Dover, New Hampshire when we lived in New Hampshire for 10 years. 60% of my kids were convicted felons. And it was an entertaining and interesting experience for all of us. I grew up in a family of educators. My mom taught in the Bronx for 37 years. And so I grew up in Ardsley, and I knew a lot about challenges outside of my very self-contained bubble that made it more important to me to focus on equity from a very early age. I have 3 children. My oldest child, Daniel, served in the 82nd Airborne 7th Special Forces Group for 8 years. He was the 2009 7th Special Forces Group Soldier of the Year. We're not a military family, but that's still gives me chills. I'm so proud of the kid. He also had an 800 on the verbal and a 760 on the math SATs. He was a political science major in college. He was a nationally ranked competitive fencer. And he chose to take his intelligence and his very kind heart to service. During that time, he spent 26 months in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And when he came home from his second deployment, he came home ill. He had PTSD. And because he wanted to stay in the Army, and because the Army was offering to send him to college while he was still active duty so he could become an officer, Daniel didn't report that he was having mental health issues, went back up to New Hampshire where we had left, but went back up to New Hampshire to go to school. And in his last semester, Daniel became a heroin addict because he wasn't able to sleep. And his wife had gone out of town for, a week to Acapulco in their last semester during the spring break. And he was alone. And instead of doing something healthy like fencing, Daniel chose to use drugs to try to get some sleep, which led to treatment through the military. And then, unfortunately, he wasn't able to get his degree because he used up his time in treatment. When he returned to Fort Bragg, he worked for a year and then found himself using again, almost died. We got a call in the middle of the night on Easter morning in 2014. The commander found out about Dan's overdose and started dishonorable discharge proceedings because he was supposed to self-report when he slipped. He was on life support at the time, so he couldn't have self-reported. And a nurse violated HIPAA, another field I'm familiar with, having worked at Caremount Medical for 10 years. He violated HIPAA to let the commander know. That resulted in Daniel fighting. He got his honorable discharge, and then he waited from September of 2014 until November of 2015 to get his disability rating from the VA. 13 months he waited without an income, without any assistance, and still intermittently using. He wasn't like full tilt addicted. Well, he was addicted, but he wasn't using all the time. Then when they gave him his disability, they set him up for treatment for January 21st of 2016. He was scheduled to go in to a dual diagnosis facility run by the VA. But Daniel died on January 8th of 2016 while he was waiting. He died from an infection related to his intermittent IV drug use. He thought it was the flu. He had called the VA about a week earlier and asked for a ride because they provide rides for care when you don't feel well but don't feel like you have to go to the hospital. And they couldn't find him a ride because it was Christmas week and the rides are provided by volunteers. So Daniel waited for 6.5 hours only to find out that he couldn't get to the VA and didn't want to go with a stranger because he was not feeling safe. So we lost him. But during that 16 months that he waited for treatment, we spoke every day until the last week, and he told me exactly what he was going to do to create veteran-friendly legislation. And I promised him that I would work with him or in his place or however he wanted me to help him get his work done. And he laughed at me. It was the last time I heard him laugh. And he said, well, of course you will, because the only person I know with a bigger mouth than me is you. So this is Daniel. Looks pretty good, right? That's the last Christmas he came home to visit. He's a raging heroin addict with a 90% mental health disability declaration in this picture. So I used this picture in Washington, D.C. for 4 years as my business card to explain to people that if you really want to take care of the people who have done so much good for you, then you need to communicate with them. You need to know what they really need, because good intent is lovely. But if you decide that you know what's best for somebody without having experienced what they're going through, you're not doing the best work that you can do. And we got some legislation passed. There's Elizabeth Warren wrote something that's in the 2019 defense budget for me that requires that exiting military who have an existing diagnosis before they leave, which Daniel did, are eligible and must be taken to the VA on the day of discharge for review so that they immediately start getting care and treatment. I worked with Chuck Schumer on some legislation. I was his guest at the first State of the Union of this administration. It was an interesting experience. And I've done a lot of work with Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. I'm on his Veterans Advisory Board. I've worked with a world full of veteran support organizations, and there are thousands of them, and they're wonderful. And when all of the work that Daniel wanted done was completed, like way faster than I expected it to, thanks to his beautiful little face, those people that I worked with, Elizabeth and Kristen Gillibrand and Chuck and Sean, all said, you know what, go home, do this at home, work for your community. So I thought about it for a while. I discussed it for some time with my family because I have 2 surviving children and a husband, and this isn't a normal lifestyle for a family. And I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable while in the process of figuring out how to mourn and live without Dan, that I was out there on the road showing my face to the world. And when I was comfortable, that they were actually comfortable with it, I put my foot in the ring, and here I am. And I've made it as clear as I possibly can that I am running for the people who have been the least recognized in this district for the longest amount of time. The people who either don't know who represents them or are afraid to go to the people who represent them because of other actions that they've done that indicate that they wouldn't be warmly received. And so I'm here, and hopefully I will be able to do the work that needs to be done to make this a community that is equitable for everyone.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your story. And our deepest, most sincere condolences to you and your family for everything you went through with Daniel, and thank him most importantly for his service and dedication to our country. Veterans have long been, given the short end of the stick when it comes to policy and legislation and support. And, it's something that hopefully we continue to fight for at every level of government. So we appreciate you fighting for that at every level of government. What we've seen a lot in 2020 has been a groundswell of support for another community that has long been given the short end of the stick. And that might be saying a lot, unfortunately, and that is the Black community. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd and some many other issues, we've seen increasing support to be more equitable and fair amongst all our populations, and to bring justice where injustice has been rampant in society. We're going to focus on questions regarding that and your positions on that, as our group is dedicated to that fight. And I think we could just dive right into it if that's okay with you.
Sure, of course.
All right. So like all municipalities and towns, Yorktown must comply with state mandated police reform in the wake of the George Floyd murder. How do you plan on helping Yorktown comply with New York State mandated police reform EO 203?
Well, I am very active in the Black Lives Matter movement. I attend a Black Lives Matter event every Saturday at the Carmel Courthouse. They've been doing this for 21 weeks, and I've been there for probably 12 weeks in a row now. So this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart on so many levels. Interestingly enough, when my mother, who used to teach in the Bronx, came up to my two oldest children's high school graduations in New Hampshire, and she sat there and she started counting the people of color, and she looked at me and shook her head and said, "This is ridiculous." Then I moved to Somers, where my mother lived, and my youngest graduated from Somers High School, and I did the same thing to her, because there were 10 times as many people of color in the Dover, New Hampshire high school graduation as there were in the Somers, New York high school. The children that are there, the people in the community shouldn't be afraid of our police. That doesn't mean I don't support the police. And I said this, I had a debate with my opponent a couple of weeks ago, and I made this as clear as I can. And I make no bones about it. I don't wait for the question to come to me when I'm in a debate forum or any other forum. It's one of the first things I talk about. Because if we are not treating the people who are struggling the most with the greatest care, we are not servicing our communities. And that includes the police. I want the police to know that I expect them to be accountable, that I expect them to follow new guidelines. And the reason that I expect that is because then it becomes very easy to sort out the bad apples, right? And I want them to know that if somebody violates regulations that are set up to keep the community safe, to protect the community from the people who are out there to protect us, I expect and hope that every single person serving will want to be completely clear on what they're doing and how they're doing it. I expect to be accountable when I get elected to every single person in the district, to every single person in the state, because your taxes pay my salary. And I don't carry a weapon for my job. If you carry a weapon for your job, you should, I would think, appreciate the fact that I will stand up and back you to the nth degree, assuming that you are completely compliant with the guidelines that you are subjected to. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that the Yorktown Police and the county police and the Putnam County Police and the Carmel Police and all the other police in the district follow the guidelines that have been set forth for them. That way they know that I will be there to back them up when they are doing the right thing. It's just important for them to feel safe and covered for doing the right actions, as it is for the bad apples to be really concerned that they will be pulled out.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your perspective on that. And another perspective I'd love to get from you relates to your history as an educator, and talking about how we educate our children about history and the potential gaps of or racial divide in our teachings. and what you would do to help develop more educational opportunities in Yorktown centered on historic inequities, systemic racism, and changing the mindset of how we learn about the role of race and what it plays in society.
So, interestingly enough, when I did teach in New Hampshire, we had a mayor who had grown up in the town that I was teaching in. And there was some conversation on the budget, and this is a town conversation, the conversation in the budget about whether or not we should buy new history textbooks. And this man, who was my age, said, the textbooks that we have are the same textbooks that we had when I was in school, and they were perfectly fine then. Now, forget about like the global changes. There is no USSR anymore. Forget about all of that. There was nothing in any of the learning tools that we were given that encouraged conversation about racial division, about inequities in our communities, about advancement for anybody but the people that were born lucky, right? I think, especially given COVID and the massive inequities that we've seen educationally because of COVID, the lack of tools for students to learn from home, the lack of internet access for some of the community, we need to take a very good look. We teach by example as much as we teach from text and from what has happened. So I would like to take the history that we have all shared, some of us more beneficially than others, and use that to show our up and coming young people how you can create change, how this system was designed to create change, and how sometimes the system is massively inequitably imbalanced, but what we can do to lead by example and teach our children that there are people of all shapes and sizes, colors, sexes, identifications, who understand that what we have been doing so far is not right. It's not fair. It's not measured in consideration for everyone. And that needs to change. And again, it's because teaching is so near and dear to my heart, it's a subject that I will fight voraciously for. Ferociously for. I will not stop until all of our communities are recognized in our educational experience.
Oh, thank you for that. No, that's a very good insight. Another place where a lot of people learn is not just through traditional education, but through, programs centered around arts and culture and, community gathering. Currently, Yorktown, the town, has announced an arts and culture committee. Would like to hear about your thoughts on that, how you would work with them as an elected official. And then, do you think that towns like Yorktown should go a step further and create a DEI committee? Many in the business community now have, DEI officers and diversity, equality, and inclusion committees in their organizations. Do you think towns like Yorktown should go that step further? And, how would you support towns in terms of grant funding and program funding to support, arts and culture initiatives that bring about more education and information about racism and equality?
So, I'm not going to talk too much about my opponent because he's not here to stand up for himself. Surprise.
Thank you.
But that said, there is has been a heated and continuing conversation about how we make things equitable, how we start to include people who have not been included in the business community, in the educational community, in the arts and entertainment community. And I think it is critical that we find ways, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do this, to introduce our communities to segments of the population that they are least familiar with. You can bring music and storytelling into a school in a way that gets every kid up and dancing and excited. You can put on productions in a community theater or in an open field that allow people to come out and see something that they've never experienced and would never have guessed even existed, let alone that they would enjoy it. It's hard to say anything about financing at this time because given the trouble we've had with COVID, budget conversations right now are exceptionally challenging and won't be part of my purview until hopefully January. But I will push hard to find creative ways. And, you know, I raised 3 children on a shoestring budget, so I'm pretty creative, to find creative ways to introduce our community to the history and beauty and wealth that comes from places and people that they are unfamiliar with. It's vitally important, and it will go a long way to educating, and it will also go a long way to being receptive. And I think we need to be more receptive. We need to have our hands held out for people to come join us, and we've not been very good at that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and totally understand with, you know, a lot of those initiatives and efforts would likely come in a post-COVID society, whether that be after a vaccine or eradication or whatever happens with COVID-19. But, you know, the pandemic is still here, it's still around us, and we've seen that it has disproportionately harmed the Black community. I heard about a week ago at the over 200,000 deaths in the United States, 1 in 5 were Black individuals. In New York State, there's long been talks about how health access has been unequal for different segments of the population. So what would you do as an elected official to help provide more equal access to health services, not just to the Black community per se, but to a lot of communities that don't have that equal access, whether it be, you know, Latino populations, seniors, children, etc.
So another area that I'm bizarrely familiar with is the medical insurance industry. When I worked for Caremount Medical for most of my time there, I was an insurance auditor, which meant that I checked to make sure that when a patient came in, their insurance was in effect. And if there was a procedure that needed to be done, how much of that procedure would be covered or would not be covered. There were 555,000 patients and 3 insurance auditors. So I'm sorry if you waited a long time. I really did my best. That said, what you learn when you look at the wealth of insurance plans available, from the most glamorous, most well-covered policies to the programs that benefit low-income folks, is that you see there's not equity anywhere on that spectrum. Your insurance company makes a deal with the practice that you go to, and they will cover this much of this procedure, visit, treatment, therapy, and all of that conversation about how much is going to come out of your pocket is done between people who never even look at you, never even talk to you, don't really give a rat's patoot about whether you have pre-existing conditions or not. The Affordable Care Act has gone a long way to helping people. I'm very worried about the Affordable Care Act on a federal level. And frankly, there are some lower priced healthcare products, you know, insurance products that are not nearly as good as some of the state funded products that you can receive. But we have to make sure that we find a way, whether it's through the New York State of Health bill that has been discussed ad nauseum, or another way to make sure that nobody dies because they can't afford to go to a doctor, that nobody dies from COVID because they're afraid to go to the doctor, because they can't leave their job, because they can't afford to leave their job to go to the doctor, for the doctor to tell them that they have to leave their job because they're sick, right? You've got children to feed, you've got roofs to put over people's heads. It's hard enough to make that happen in the most ideal of circumstances. But that said, we can find, I'm certain of it, having my experience in the wealth of insurance, if we say to the insurance companies, look, you know what? You don't get all the power in this conversation anymore. We are here to support our families and our communities and our citizens. And if you want to continue to exist as a company, as a corporation, you're going to have to work within the system that we build so that everybody is covered. Because I'll be damned if I watch another person suffer because they're afraid to get treatment, because they don't know where to get treatment, because they can't afford treatment. It shouldn't be an either or. We're responsible for our neighbors and our friends and our brothers and our sisters. We're responsible. I raised my children to understand. They were very fortunate. We were never rich, but we always had a roof and we always had food. And I worked with children who didn't always have a roof and didn't always have food. And sometimes I had to go visit them in the jail to give them their lessons. My kids learned from a very early age, when you are that blessed, when you have the great good fortune of having your most extreme needs taken care of you for granted without having to worry about it, it is your responsibility when you see something like that not happening for someone you know, to stand up and do something about it, to push back against the system. And, you know, I kind of took it to the extreme becoming a veterans advocate, but I was lucky. I had a household income with my husband's job that afforded me the ability to be able to do this. Not everybody can.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I encourage people who can, when they see something wrong, to do something about it.
Thank you for sharing. And I think there's another great segue in there. I know you mentioned, you know, having a roof over your head and those most extreme needs. Our group did look at some reports and studies about that exact topic of having a roof over your head, specifically in Yorktown. 2012 report by ProPublica showed that housing populations by race, actual versus if it was based solely on income by demographic, there's a disproportionately low number of Black homeowners. Theoretically, back in 2012, just based on income distribution across the entire population, you'd have between 11 and 12% of Yorktown as Black homeowners. The actual number was, I believe, in between 1 and 1.5%. So a definite disparity there. In your role as an elected official, if you're to be elected, how would you help Yorktown close this gap? And what housing opportunities would you bring to not just the Black population, people of color, but other folks who may want to either start their family here in Yorktown, younger families that might be have a lower income, a starting income, or older folks that don't want to, quote unquote, fly south for retirement, but stay in the town of Yorktown. Housing is expensive here.
Yes.
As I mentioned earlier on our call, I come from Long Island, so relatively might not be as expensive, but for a lot of folks, the cost of entry is a significant issue with living in Yorktown. And I would like to know how you would help create more affordable opportunities here.
So this is an onion that has many layers to peel, right? First of all, if you want to move into this incredibly difficult community to move into, you need to have open arms. We talked about this before. People have to be welcoming. You need to find financing. Sometimes finding financing is more challenging depending on your background, of course, your sources of income. I would first, for financing for homes, and this goes into my small business conversation that I had the other day, for helping people move into the small business arena in Yorktown in particular, where there are an unfortunate number of empty storefronts right now. Unfortunately, to make those first few steps that make this a more welcoming place, then to find ways to help people finance without the challenges that they might experience just because of their backgrounds, you have to incentivize the people with the power. You know, there's business, there's all kinds of small business organizations and landlords who need to be incentivized. And that's an unfortunate fact, but it is a fact. There are people who, quite frankly, would rather have their property that they own that has a storefront stay empty than to bring somebody in that doesn't look like what they want it to look like. Excuse me. And, so we have to find a way to make the value of having folks move into this community who we haven't seen before. We have to find good reasons for that to be intriguing for the people in charge. Whether that's, you know, subsidies for landlords who own storefronts to say, look, would you rather have the storefront be empty, or would you rather take a little bit of a hit on what you call your rent and maybe take a little bit of a subsidy from the state to make up for some of the difference? To banks, can you show us how you make these decisions? If I give you 2 applications for a mortgage and don't show you any pictures, and both of the people are, for the sake of checking them out, named John Smith, can you show me how you're going to make a decision that will be the best decision for the entire community, not just for your bank, but for the entire community? We have to take the fear that lives so deeply inside some people who get to make decisions out of the conversation and make them, you know, like a kid with a cookie. Here's your treat. Take another look at this, you know, and tell me why it's this way from your end. I will, this is so important to me, I will fight very, very hard to wheedle my way into places that people who don't look like me can't get into, so that I can open the door for them. People who don't want to listen to me because of my party affiliation. People who don't want to listen to me because they know I've stood at the Black Lives Matter events. For whatever reason, people don't want to listen to me, I will make them hear me. Like my son said, except for him, I'm the person with the biggest mouth he's ever known. And I will use it, and I won't stop until there's good and balanced housing and business opportunities for everybody in Yorktown. Everybody, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, female, male, non-gender identified, doesn't matter. We can all benefit from what everybody has to bring to the table. And we need to be able to make them know that there's a seat here for them.
Thank you for that. And it did very much touch on the small business question that I know many people have in terms of the empty storefronts in Yorktown. I do have one other business-related question before we get to a final remark. New York State currently has 29.13% of state government contracts awarded to MWBEs, minority and women-owned business enterprises. This practice is done at the state, not done at the local level. Do you recommend the practice of awarding a percentage of contracts to MWBEs at the local level? Do you recommend local municipalities have a committee a mandate, a goal? How do you think a town like Yorktown can look at the MWBE program conducted by the state and replicate it or mimic it or utilize it as a springboard to work more with minority businesses?
So I think you're brilliant in saying springboard. I think that is a brilliant way of looking at it, because the reality is that to have to bend in ways to find people to come into the community to meet a set of standards that fulfills the requirements of an MWBE is not always the best in the best interests of the community. So I would like very much for there to be some sort of committee set up that would look at how we can welcome and invite folks from all over, outside of the district, inside of the district, who might be interested to come in, and then and encourage people who have not been part of the conversation to be included in the committee, so that perspectives are shared that don't include, the mindset of, I've lived here all my life and I've never seen a problem. That is a common talking point, and not always by people who are doing it because they're racist, but because that's just the way they've lived their lives. They haven't looked where they aren't in the spaces they're not located in, and they haven't really paid attention. If you haven't seen it, it's because it's hiding in the background somewhere and you have to uncover it. We have to find a way to utilize members of the community to do what is in the best interests of the community, which includes the voices from all perspectives. What that's going to look like specifically, I can't tell you now, but I think you're brilliant in making the point that we can use the regulations and guidelines of the state as a jumping off point to kind of figuring something that works in the best interests of everybody in our communities.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Another very insightful way of looking at making actionable change in our community. I do want to finish up here. Just one final question. And this is more of a broad strokes type of question for you, but our society is rife with political division. And in spite of what many people may think, there are likely a number of undecided voters still out there as we get to the election, which is a little over a week away, even though early voting has already started. Mm-hmm. Say, for the sake of this discussion, you were having a one-on-one conversation with an undecided voter. And the simple question of, well, why should I vote for you came up. What would your response be to that individual person? Why should they cast their vote for Stephanie Keegan?
That's an interesting question. It's come up a couple of times. Look, I've been a mother for 33 years. I think I was a mother before I was a mother, and my children will tell you I'm a mother of a different sort sometimes. I can be really, really tough, but I try incredibly hard to be fair. I look at every single perspective and I listen to every single person that is willing to spend time talking to me. I've made it a point for the last 4 years of helping out a specific group of our population, our veterans. In an earlier path, I was teaching children who were not well served by the system. I am about making sure that every voice gets heard. And whether we agree or not, I will listen respectfully to anything you have to say, because this is your community as much as it is my community. And if I serve you, you are paying me a salary to be the best servant to the community that I can possibly be. And I don't take that lightly. I love my husband dearly, but I may not see him very much for the next several years, just like I didn't when I was traveling to Washington, because we are lucky. We have what we need. Not everybody's that lucky. And I want to make sure that I am here so that the people who feel like they're missing out on something that they need to have are heard and advocated for. That's kind of who I am in a nutshell, and I bake a mean chocolate chip cookie too.
There you go. Well, thank you very much again. We really, truly appreciate your time. We know time is finite and it is very hard to come by, especially now in the heat of election season. Where could people find more information about you? Website, email address if they have questions?
Okay, so you can email me at my personal email. I have a campaign email, but email me at my personal email, because in a week and a day, the election is going to be over and I'm probably going to have some kind of different email. My personal email is AJK, S as in Sam, UDMA@AOL.com. I've had it for like 35 years from when we lived in Sudbury, Massachusetts. My Facebook page, I have a Facebook page. It's a personal Facebook page. Just look me up by my name, Stephanie Keegan. I also have a campaign Facebook page, which is Keegan for Assembly. I have a website, which is Keegan for New York. It's all spelled out, KeeganForNewYork.com. That will give you that site in particular will give you some more insight into how I started this. There's a little video about the work that I did before I came to this election process. And I do have a Twitter page that I started when I was advocating for veterans. It's War is Not Over, WARSNOTOVER, particularly reflective of the space that my son found himself in when he became a civilian again. Please reach out to me. Anybody who hears this, sees this, watches this, I really am doing this for you. So please, please reach out to me. You can call me on my cell phone or text me at 914-534-1390. I might get a couple of phone calls that I really don't enjoy, but the fact is that after what our family has been through, there is nothing that's going to change my course. I'm going to be here fighting for the people who need it. And if I have to, give a piece of my mind to somebody, I will, but feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you. I actually might text you for that chocolate chip cookie recipe. But no, thank you so much. And for everyone watching, again, we appreciate Stephanie Keegan for taking the time to join us for the Yorktown for Justice. Was originally scheduled to be a debate amongst the assembly candidates, but due to Ms. Keegan being the one who agreed to have a conversation with us, it turned into this Q&A. And regardless of your feelings, of your positions, of where you feel our municipality, our state, our country are at, this is an informative session for us in the hopes that everyone in Yorktown exercises not what I believe is a right, but also a privilege to vote. So please do that. Thank you, Stephanie, for your time and speaking with me on behalf of YFJ about issues in our town. And hopefully we will get the chance to speak again soon.
That would be lovely. And I'll bring you some cookies.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take good care.
All right. And thank you again, everyone, for listening and watching.